Hey everyone, it's Ornlu, and we're going to start the year with the State of the Civs 2023. So for those who are new or need a refresher, State of the Civs is a short series I do around the start of a new year where we take a holistic look at all of the civilizations in AoE2 right now, assessing not only just how balanced they are, but also how cohesive their design is. Basically, do these civs feel like a natural part of the AoE2 roster? Are they unique? Do they have situations where they shine and situations where they struggle? Do their bonuses feel gimmicky or out of place? That sort of thing. For the format of these videos, we're going to do things a little bit differently than last year, where I placed all of the civs on a tier list for the first time. Instead, we're going to give a quick breakdown of each civ and how they fit into the AoE2 roster, talk about any issues they might have concerning their design, consider the tier placement I gave them last year, and then finally, if any of the balance changes that took place over the course of 2022 changes their ranking. Now, there are 42 civs in AoE2 right now, so instead of making super long videos where I cover a ton at once, I thought it might be a bit better this year to spread things out a bit, and make 7 videos where you look at 6 civs at a time. Of course, this is episode 1, and we're going to be going in alphabetical order, which means here we will be taking a look at the Aztecs, Bengalis, Berbers, Bohemians, Britons, and Bulgarians. So if you guys are excited for this breakdown, be sure to leave a like on the video, comment on what you think of the civs we cover, and subscribe to the channel for tons more AoE2 content. Now, before we jump into the civs themselves, I'm just going to give a quick refresher on what I mean by these tiers, as it's not your typical S through D tier list. At the top, we have the complete tier. These civs feel like core parts of AoE2, iconic, balanced, unique, and possessing noticeable strengths and weaknesses. There are no parts of these civs that glaringly need any changes, from civ bonuses to UUs to tech tree. Next, there is the almost there tier. As you can imagine, these civs are almost to the complete tier, but they have 1 or 2 wrinkles in their design that should probably be addressed. This could be a unit or a bonus or a tech, something like that. Basically, the civ is 1 or 2 patches away from being complete. One step down and we have the something is off tier. These civs generally make sense and they certainly feel like AoE2 civs. The issues come from wonky balancing, possess several units or bonuses that need tweaking, or just have one design aspect that really makes no sense. Then we have the somewhat problematic civs. Again, these guys make sense generally speaking, but there are really some noticeable issues when it comes to design or balance. It's at this point that the civs start to not quite feel like AoE2 civs. Getting towards the bottom, we have a few major changes needed civs. This is getting to the point where I can identify some pretty fundamental design issues with these civs. Parts of their identity or balance might be there, but there's just a fair amount of iterating that needs to happen before the civ feels complete. Lastly, we have the fundamental rework tier, which if you remember from last year was basically the Indians tier, as the civ just had so many core issues. Since that tier was just one civ, I'll be talking about it in greater detail once I get to the Hindustanis segment. Phew, with all of that set up, let's finally get into it, shall we? As always, we're gonna kick things off with the Age of Conqueror's fan favorite, the Aztecs. This infantry and monk civ is classic in AoE2, notably being one of the 3 very distinct American civs that miss all cavalry and gunpowder. These civs play out differently enough that I think that the most logical point of comparison is between them as opposed to the other 39 civs. So how do Aztecs differ from their Mayan and Inca brethren? Well, of all the American civs, Aztecs are the most aggressively inclined, focusing on raw power and speed over cost efficiency. Your units have no discount like Mayans and aren't naturally efficient like Incas, but they train quickly, are backed by the strongest mid-game economy of the American civs, and can represent some incredible individual value. This comes from super high attack infantry and even skirmishers, monks that can have as much HP as hussars, and even access to the best siege of the American civs, as Aztecs are the only one of the 3 to possess the mighty siege onager. This civ is all about hitting you hard and fast and then never letting go for the rest of the game. Just as important as its strengths, Aztecs do have some noticeable weaknesses. Beyond the obvious lack of cavalry and gunpowder that is shared with Mayans and Incas, Aztecs are one of the most gold-reliant civs in all of AoE2. Their best units are expensive in gold cost and are additionally fairly fragile. This means that long-term cost efficiency is not really something the Aztecs excel at, so it becomes imperative to finish games early with this civ. Last year, Aztecs enjoyed their typical Ornlu tier list privilege by being put right into the complete tier, as this civ is just so iconic. You could make the argument that they are too powerful on open maps, but honestly, I feel like Aztecs have been nerfed enough over the years that they are pretty much in line with the other top picks. They're also solid on closed maps, but weaker on water maps, hybrid maps, and most team game settings. As the civ is basically complete, Aztecs received no balance changes in the past year, and thanks to some good old-fashioned power creep, they feel more balanced than ever. Therefore, Aztecs get to stick in the complete tier. A nice, strong start for this video series. We go from one of the most tried and true AoE2 civs to one of the newest and most controversial ones in the Bengalis, who hail from the most recent Dynasties of India expansion. These guys are considered an elephant in naval civilization, and like with the American civs, the Bengalis share many design traits unique to the other South South Asian civilizations, such as their lack of knights and the regional units of elephant archers and siege elephants, but also with some similarities to Southeast Asian civilizations like Khmer and Burmese, like the heavier focus on elephants in particular. Still, above all else, Bengalis are a slow, defensive, and economically oriented civilization, emphasizing expensive and powerful units. Elephants are the obvious strength here, and thanks to a bonus mitigating their key counters, Bengalis have fairly viable battle elephants, elephant archers, and siege elephants. On top of that, though, they also have the versatile Ratha unique unit, which can somewhat fill the gap of the Bengali tech tree, serving as something of a heavy cavalry and cav archer unit. Rounding out their army, Bengalis also have an excellent navy, and thanks to an update, quite good monks. Now, all of those units I mentioned are quite expensive, so thankfully Bengalis have a strong economy in both early and late game. Still, all of these mighty elephants do not address the elephant in the room with this civ. They're just really too slow to be viable on anything resembling an open map, and even run into problems on closed maps. The early game economy is above average, but not top tier, and this does not go well with a limited tech tree for the mainline units of archers, infantry, and cavalry. No knights or thumbring make your meta options mediocre, not aided by the fact that your military bonuses only apply to monks, elephants, and rathas. Even on closed maps, Bengalis lack gunpowder, which is so critical to success on maps like Arena and Black Forest in this day and age. All of these issues stem from the fact that elephant units are not quite viable enough in standard settings, being too expensive, slow, and easily countered until you get them in larger numbers. Now, those issues are not necessarily unique to Bengalis, but they are exacerbated by the fact that Bengalis are more elephant reliant than pretty much any other civ in the game. So where does that leave us with the tier list? As Bengalis came out in 2022, we have no baseline to work with from last year, but I feel the civ pretty decisively fits into the somewhat problematic tier. Their more standard play was helped significantly by their one major balance change post-launch, where their monks now receive +3/+3 armor for free, but at the end of the day, the applications of this civ feel a little too limited. That said, the basic design of Bengalis does make sense. Powerful and expensive elephants that are supported by a strong economy, and that does feel unique. Furthermore, their balance is not completely horrendous, as we do see Bengalis picked in high-level tournaments on water maps and closed maps, particularly Regicide Fortress. So that's Bengalis. They're new, they have some issues, but the basic design is there, and it's not impossible to envision a future where they are a more natural fit into the AoE2 civ roster. Next up, we go to our first African kingdom civilization, the Berbers. These guys are considered a cavalry and naval civilization, but to take that a step further, I would say that Berbers are a cavalry/camel civ that focuses more on mid to late game cost efficiency and a broad tech tree. At a basic level, Berbers are defined by their cheaper stable units in the Castle and Imperial Age, which comes at the cost of any real economy bonus. This creates the interesting dynamic where Berbers are pretty much the only strong cavalry civ to also possess a weak scout rush. These guys are all about the mid to late game, where you have fully upgraded and cheap hussars, cavalier, and heavy camels, as well as the extremely cost-efficient camel archer unique unit. Speed is a big theme with the civilization, as all of those units I just mentioned are quite fast in themselves, and you even have 2 speed boost civ bonuses with faster moving villagers and ships. This more generalist approach means that Berbers can thrive on most map types, but at a notable cost, the early game. Other than your excellent villager fighting capabilities with the civ, Berbers don't really have much going for them in the Dark and Feudal Age, where it's generally about surviving with your faster moving villagers to escape danger so you can make it to the Castle Age. Similarly, even though your cost-efficient cavalry helps out a ton in the late game on open maps and 1v1s, the lack of paladin or some sort of bonus to individual unit strength can hurt them in team games and even really boomy 1v1s. That said, this dynamic is what makes Berbers stand out as a civilization, and one that feels quite balanced in most settings. The core of this civ is there, but there are some issues that led me to place them in the something is off tier last year. Namely, that issue is the Genitor and its implementation as a team bonus. I feel like the concept of a mounted skirmisher is totally fine, but I really don't see why it has to be a team bonus. Skirmishers are generally quite bad in team games, so I'd much rather see their Castle Age unique tech Casbah become their new team bonus, and then have something else created to be the new Castle Age unique tech. In the last year, the Berbers did have one balance change, and it was to the Genitor, as the unit went from costing 50 food and 35 wood to 40 food and 35 wood. This helps the unit balance-wise, and I do think that Genitors are pretty viable in 1v1s, but this doesn't really change the awkwardness of the unit's implementation as a team bonus. For those reasons, although I like Berbers and think they're well balanced, I don't think enough has changed for me to move them from the something is off tier. Moving right along, we now turn to the Bohemians from the Dawn of the Dukes expansion. These guys are considered a gunpowder and monk civilization, and that designation is certainly spot on. Bohemians are a closed map powerhouse, possessing one of the strongest strongest post-Imperial Age armies in the game with the combination of halberdiers, hand cannoneers, and Hofnitze. With the possible additions of monks, arbalests, and bombard towers, you get an army that is very slow but almost impossible to deal with for a number of civilizations. Economically, Bohemians are decent, with the free mining upgrade serving as a means to get you where you need to be militarily, as opposed to some sort of booming powerhouse. Underwhelming cavalry for the Bohemians ensures that you'll never be top tier on open maps, and the same goes for their navy on water and hybrid maps. However, that doesn't really matter, as the Civ is just so potent on any setting that naturally limits mobility or early aggression. And that brings us to the place of Bohemians in the current meta. Last year, I placed Bohemians in the something is off tier, praising how cohesive their identity is as a gunpowder and monk Civ, filling another niche within the slow doom push archetype. The big knock I had against the Civ was the implementation of the Hussite wagon, which has a gimmicky bonus of reducing projectile damage behind it, and simply is clunky to control. Of course, Bohemians were only in the game for a couple months when I made the State of the Civs last year, and I'd say that we have a much better idea now of how the Civ plays. Unfortunately for Bohemians, it's a bit tricky to address. They are simply so strong on closed maps against so many Civs, and yet at the same time they feel reasonably balanced versus the other top tier closed map Civs, and are also pretty balanced on open maps. The issue with Bohemians is that Halb, Hofnitze, and hand cannoneers are absolutely oppressive versus like half the Civs in the game, and I feel that presents a noticeable design issue. Now, in the last year, the devs did nerf Bohemians by tuning down the attack and blast radius of the Hofnitze, as well as removing the cheaper monasteries as a Civ bonus. Both of these changes are quite welcome, and the Civ is certainly more balanced than it used to be, but I still feel like Bohemians are a bit too oppressive on closed maps. All of this is not even to mention the Hussite wagon, which is basically unchanged from last year, as are my critiques of the unit being too gimmicky and clunky to control. Because of that, I'm actually going to downgrade Bohemians from the something is off tier placement of last year to somewhat problematic this year. The Civ feels like it's just in too much of an unbalanced state at the moment. Basic design is totally there, and the Bohemians are fun to play, but they can also just not be very fun to play against. The second to last Civ today is going to be our first OG Age of Kings entry, the Britons. These guys are of course considered a foot archer civilization according to the game, and beyond that, they are basically the original archetype for an archer civilization within Age of Empires 2. Perhaps more than anything else, Britons are most notable in the game for their longer range archers and longbowmen unique unit. The former allows Britons to play a bit more differently than most Civs, as although you lack the raw DPS from the thumb ring upgrade, your extra range allows your archers to dictate engagements better than any others. Economically, Britons are quite powerful, with the faster working shepherds helping you out in the early game, and the cheap TCs aiding your boom in the mid game. The cheaper TCs in particular lead Britons to play a bit more of an economic approach compared to other strong archer Civs, which tend to be a bit more of the low eco, lots of archers, timing attack sort of style. Working with that, you have the infamous team bonus of faster working archery ranges. Although this makes Britons' role in team games a bit too potent, as I'll talk about in a moment, it does nicely complement the high eco approach of Britons, as you'll need the extra resources from your strong economy to be able to support all of those long-range archers. Lastly, complementing the long-range, slow creep, pierce damage army compositions favored by Britons, extra attack towers and precision warwolf trebuchets really round out their late game. So last year I placed Britons in the almost there tier, praising the Civ for all of the reasons I just talked about, but critiquing them for the balancing of the faster working archery range's team bonus and the somewhat genericness of longbowmen. The latter I feel is a bit of a non-issue because longbowmen are so iconic within the entire Age of Empires franchise, and it does hold the distinction for being the longest range archer in the game. The former issue of their team bonus, however, is definitely an issue, as it has become quite pronounced in anything resembling a high-level team game. The team game meta is so aggressive these days and so focused on getting out as many archers as quickly as possible that Britons are simply hands down the best flank Civ on most open maps. To be honest, I'm not entirely sure how to address the issue because Huns, Goths, Celts, and Lithuanians all have team bonus that make a certain military building work plus 20% faster, and those are balanced enough, so I don't know. Also, their only balance change this year is that they got treadmill crane. Moral of the story is that Brits are basically fine and are still almost there, but we really need to consider the implementation of their team bonus specifically in team games themselves. Lastly for today, we have our last con Civ, the Bulgarians. They are considered to be an infantry and cavalry civilization, and were interestingly the first Civ to get that designation. In-game, Bulgarians are very much an aggressive military-focused Civ that shine on open land maps. Their ideal army compositions of infantry, siege, and cavalry are shared with several Civs, like Slavs, Teutons, and even Celts to a degree, but of all of those, Bulgarians are the only ones that lack an eco bonus. Instead, you get the free swordsman upgrades to apply early pressure, cheap and fast researching blacksmith blacksmith upgrades to apply early pressure, and even access to crep posts in the mid-game to apply even more pressure. I'm sensing a bit of a common theme here. Nevertheless, Bulgarians still have potent options throughout the game, as Stirrups gives the Civs some of the strongest cavalry out there, and the cheap siege workshop upgrades allow those strong post-imp siege weapons to be played in 1v1s as well as team games. Of course, all of that military potential is balanced by some very salient weaknesses. Your only eco bonus is the cheaper stone cost for your TCs, which, although nice, isn't really lighting the world on fire in its strength. Also, their tech tree has some noticeable holes, missing crossbowmen, gunpowder, and even decent monks. And that takes us to how the Bulgarians function in the AoE2 metagame. The Civ is certainly viable in a variety of aggressive settings, and therefore we tend to see them decently often in tournaments, so on that front I'd say they're quite balanced. They can also function in late game on more closed maps thanks to strong infantry and siege, although the lack of good monks and bombard cannons prevent them from being super popular. Last year I placed the Bulgarians in the somewhat problematic tier, which in retrospect felt a little too harsh. Yes, they have plenty of similarities with Civs like Slavs, but in practice there is a sizable difference in playstyle. To my mind, the Civ is actually in a pretty good spot. Their bonuses and unique techs all feel like they're useful, and Bulgarians can thrive in plenty of different settings. The only remaining aspect of Bulgarians that feel like a bit of a problem these days is the Konik. It's not that the unit is bad per se, but it does feel a bit underwhelming, especially without the Stirrups upgrade. Perhaps a small buff to the dismounted Konik could help the unit be the more late game oriented cavalry option for the Bulgarians that it's intended to be. So with that in mind, I do think that Bulgarians should be in the almost there tier despite not receiving any major balance changes over the past year. Maybe this is just me being inconsistent in my judging or having another year's worth of perspective on the game, but I do like the design of Bulgarians a fair amount right now, and think that there are only a few tweaks to the Konik away from being a complete Civ. And with that, we have completed our first week of Civ reviews. I'll do my best to release one of these a week for the next month and a half, until we can slog our way through all of the Civs. I know this may seem kind of slow, but there are a lot of Civs in AoE2 right now, and I want to make sure I have the opportunity to give all of them a fair shake. Lastly, I do want to give a special shout out to my Patreon supporters, with Tristan in the Great Wolf tier, and then Elvanor, Carolyn, and Donnie in the Dire Wolf tier. If you're interested in supporting my channel further and getting some extra perks, the link for my Patreon is always in the description. But of course, thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.